Hi, this is Nahid, and I'd like to welcome you to July 2015. The theme for our month is assessments, and what I wanted to do was give you an overview of all the assessments in recorded format because it's fun to do it this way, and also because it'll give you a point of reference as you go through the various different classes we're going to be doing this month. So, let's first talk about why use assessments, because this question gives us sort of a way of taking all the assessments out there and categorizing them in some way that makes sense. We use assessments to answer questions like, who am I? Why am I facing this challenge in life? And what direction should I go from here? For example, career assessments to help you kind of figure out where you might want to move going forward as your next step in your career. And so because there's different reasons that people use assessments, there's different types of assessments out there. And I sort of lump the different assessments into two different categories. The first category are what I'm going to call internal assessments, because they ask you questions about how you think and how you feel, and the answers that come out are basically based on your own internal responses. And these types of assessments you can use to find your strengths, to learn about your personality. A lot of career assessments take this approach. Strength finder type assessments will take this approach. Also the personality test, MyersBriggs, Enneagram, will take this internal approach where they'll ask you questions about what you think or what you feel or what you know, and that's how they discover, or that's how they categorize you or come up with your results. But another way that assessments work is externally. So they'll look at you from outside characteristics. So for example, how do you look to others, or what's your style or role in a group? And a 360 is a great example of this. So you don't even answer the questions yourself in a 360. Other people around you, and the reason it's called 360 is you might take a group of people who work for you if you're a leader, and also your bosses and also your peers, so you get a circle of people who relate to you in different ways in your organization. They answer a bunch of questions about you, and then you get your data based on how other people perceive you. But there are also social styles or DISC assessments that talk about your style in a group, and a lot of what they're measuring is how you show up outside of yourself. So two people who have very similar feelings and motivations on the inside may actually look different on the outside. And so on an internal, so I have my little laser pointer here, on an internal personality test, they may actually show up the same, but in an external type of a test or assessment, they might show up completely differently from each other because their way of interacting with other people may be different. So it's kind of interesting how these assessments work. Another thing to keep in mind with assessments is the depth of assessments vary. So you have so many assessments out there that are surface level, the colors assessment, the this assessment, the that assessment. Assessments are fun to build, and I've built my own assessments that I've really enjoyed working with. The ones I've built have been for a specific purpose, but I didn't go to college and get a degree in designing tests or assessments, and some people actually have done that. There's actually a whole subsection of psychology just devoted to people devising psychological tests and instruments. And some of these tests that you can take have been around for a really, really long time, and they've been validated with many people taking the tests and getting results and measuring the statistical spread on the results to see how much error there is. And they've actually been designed by test developers. So you have the whole spectrum of tests, from people that were little assessments that were just designed by laymen to assessments, that were designed by people who have years of experience in designing tests. And then again, you have the tests that are designed to look at different aspects of who we are, and some just look at really surface level external characteristics, and some dive really deep. So we're going to give you an overview of the assessments this month, and we're going to take some of them. So some of them we're going to do short versions on your actual phone classes. You'll get to actually experience some of the assessments, and some of them you'll actually have to go outside and take if you want to take, but you're going to have an opportunity this month to take quite a few assessments and really enjoy yourself and learn a lot about yourself in the process. I'm going to start by talking about career assessments, and the reason I'm going to do this is because there are so many career assessments that I can't even tell you or give a recommendation on a career assessment anymore. There used to be one called the MAP, and I took it and I didn't like it, but other people have had really good results with it. So what I'm going to say is you can go into Google and you can type in the word career assessments, and the MAP will come up first, but then you'll get this website called Quintessential Careers. And when I was doing career coaching, we used this site a lot. So this is a very credible site, Quintessential Careers. But they didn't have any assessments. They just had a lot of articles on how to assess assessments, which I thought was really helpful. And what they essentially said is there are so many free career assessments on the web that you should take as many as you can if they're free, but then you also want to keep in mind that there may be bias in these assessments. Maybe they're trying to sell you something, and they may not give you, valid results, but they could give you interesting insights, and if you take it all for what it is, you can get insights that you might not have otherwise had on yourself. So it's not like they're not valuable. The other thing is that there's these assessment companies, and they will sell assessments to high schools and colleges, and there's so many of them. And I remember I worked at University of Phoenix in a career program for a while, and they had a special assessment that they used. And I worked for Pepperdine for a while, and they had a special assessment they used. And I think when you go to high school, they have career assessments that they put the high schoolers through. And these assessment companies, they only sell to the education system. So a lot of times, in order to get a career assessment, you have to go to a career counselor, and certain career counselors have access to certain career assessments. I feel kind of mixed. I would have people at Pepperdine come to me and say, well, I have these results from this career assessment, and typically what I found is their results really left them somewhat confused, or they validated something they already knew. So the results didn't give them a eureka moment or a big aha or help them go, okay, now I'm for sure going to do this, and these are my next steps. And a lot of people were disappointed because they didn't get that. So these assessments are going to give you some insights. They're not going to necessarily give you the answer. I'll tell you, the university, I got to take some of these assessments. The University of Phoenix assessment that we did, and I can't even remember the name of it because, there's so many of these assessments, and they try to sell to the college, and the college will use that assessment for a year or two, and then the college may change assessment companies. So it's kind of bizarre how there isn't, I don't think there's one assessment that all the colleges use. But I took this assessment, and this assessment, the way it works is they happen to be an organization that works with a bunch of Fortune 500 companies, and they gave the assessment to a bunch of people who were high performers in various different jobs, and they tried to get as many job classifications as they could. So they took all these people and they had them answer these questions, and then they had the people that took the assessments that were students or didn't have a profession, they would match their answers to the answers of the people that did well in these jobs, and they would, tell you kind of who you matched up to, and then they would give you a whole list of names of careers that you matched up to, and it was bewildering, this list you would get. You would get these names of job titles, and you wouldn't even know what the job title meant, but it just happened to be that people in that job title in general seem to answer the questions sort of like you answered the questions. So then what you had to do was research. You had to go and look at those job titles and then continue along your career research. So again, it does give you some information, these assessments, but they don't necessarily give you what I think most people are seeking when they take a career assessment, which is, what should I do with my life? What's my next step? So yeah, again, I was just telling you what the methodology is of some of these. And also, I noticed with one of the career assessments I took, I know I got really kind of angry when I took it because I already had established myself as a leader, but I scored really low on leadership. And the reason I scored really low on leadership was because in the test, the questions were designed with the assumptions that leaders liked to manipulate people. And they asked the questions like, I enjoy telling people what to do. I enjoy convincing people to do it my way. And those were the questions that they felt if people scored high on, they would make good leaders. So the other thing you have to take into consideration is the people that design these tests. What are the assumptions that they bring in when they design their tests? And the reason I was angry about this particular assessment is because as a leader, I found the most empowering thing to do is not try to convince people to do it your way, but to empower people. And we know this in leadership, but for whatever reason, the person designing the test did not understand what real leadership was. And so they assumed that leaders were people who like to manipulate. And in fact, that's not the case, and that's not really what makes a great leader. So very interesting. And again, these assessments you sort of have to take for how they're written, and you have to take the insights you get and the scores you get, and you have to be the judge of what you're going to take from them. Okay, so no career assessment can give you an answer. It can just give you a few ideas. Now, what Aspyrre uses. So I don't actually use any of these career assessments because none of them have been as insightful to me as the one that we use at Aspyrre. And the one that we use at Aspyrre is something that I created, but it was based on one of my favorite career authors, the guy named Richard Bowles, and he wrote the book, What Color is Your Parachute? And he had this methodology where you go back into your past life and you think of times when you really felt successful, and then you took these times and you looked at what they had in common with each other. And so you'll hear me at Aspyrre ask you to do a list of brainstormed proudest moments, or sometimes I'll have you do in my element stories. And I will modify the exercise to your situation. So for example, if you're looking for your strength, I'm going to ask you for proudest moments. But if you're looking for fulfillment, I might say moments when you felt really fulfilled. So whatever it is you're looking for, what we do is we go back into your past life and we have you find moments from your life when you felt very close to how you want to be feeling, and we look for what those moments had in common. It's a really powerful assessment. It takes you and your past life, and that's where it gets the data from, and it really brings forth pretty clearly what your strengths are, what your values are, what makes you happy. So the exciting part is analyzing it, and various different people in the Aspyrre group, we've really dove in deep and spent a lot of time analyzing. And with others, we didn't dive in deep. It just became really obvious, and it was just kind of validation. People were like, okay, I get it. I can see what the trends are. I can see what the themes are here. But this is what I have found to be most reliable and most insightful and better than just about any career assessment that I've seen so far on the market. But I have to say that with the caveat that I've sort of been so overwhelmed with all the different assessments out there that I haven't probably done due diligence on them. However, I love this one. And with Aspyrre clients who are looking for careers, what I would always do is take you through the In My Element stories first. And when I say proudest moments and In My Element stories, I'm talking really about the same thing. I would always take you through that first, and then if you really wanted more, then we would send you outside to take a career assessment. And these career assessments range from the free ones on the web all the way to assessments that cost $1,600. I had someone talk to me about an assessment that cost something like $2,500. So there's some really expensive assessments out there too, but people have been happy with the information that they've gotten. They're very thorough, probably really well time tested too. So we would find you an outside assessment if you really wanted to dig deep and get a career path laid out for you. Okay, what I'm going to do now is talk about the other assessments that are more popular. And Myers-Briggs is probably the most popular assessment out there. It's sometimes called the MBTI. You take this test and you end up getting this type, which is 4 letters. And so since there's 4 letters, and in each of the 4 spots, you can be one of 2 letters. Altogether, that makes 16 possible combinations that you can have, 4-letter combinations. And almost everyone has had an opportunity at one point or another to take a Myers-Briggs. So it's a really popular tool. It's a tool that's used in organizations a lot. It's been around for a long time, and there's a lot of benefits to it. What the Myers-Briggs actually does is it measures who you are inside along 4 dimensions. And this is the way they describe the 4 dimensions. So the first dimension, E versus I, they talk about what's your favorite world. If you're an E, your favorite world is the outer world of people around you. If you're an I, your favorite world is your inner world, your thoughts and your ideas. The second dimension, which is N or S, is how do you take in information? Do you like to take in information through your senses, what you can see, taste, smell, more facts, things that are solid? Or do you like to interpret and add meaning and get most of your information from inside? So do you create a story about it, or do you make connections inside, and do you rely on that for your meaning or for your information? And so N's are the people that take information and combine it with their thoughts to come up with the information that they most rely on. And S's will look more at the facts outside of themselves, and they won't add extra meaning to them. Then there is the F and T dimension, and this has to do with how you make decisions. So when you make decisions, do you prefer to first look at logic and consistency, or first look at people and special circumstances? So essentially, when you're making a decision, do you tend to make it on principles first, and then kind of as a secondary thing, think about how the people are impacted? Or do you make it about people first? And a good example of this is when coming up with a team at work. Do you think about, okay, these are all the different things that have to get done, and so these are the strengths we need. So of these people we have, who can fit into what slot, and let me fit them into the functions? Or do you take the people first, and do you say, okay, what strengths do the people have, and then who can do what based on that? So do you divide the job up based on the people, or do you divide the people up based on the job? And it's kind of just what you would think of first as a habit. And then the last dimension is structure. So in dealing with the outside world, do you prefer to get things decided, or do you prefer to stay open to new information and options? So a J would be someone who would basically have a plan and follow the plan, and a P would be someone who may be fine having a plan, but they tend to kind of keep things open so that they can always change the plan at the last minute if they want to. So this was a very simplified overview of the Myers-Briggs, but with those 4 spectrums, and then they're also spectrums, so you could score high or low on all these dimensions. So kind of where you are on all these spectrums makes up your type. And every type, you can see over here with my little marker, you can see, you're not going to be able to read this because it's just a picture and it's low resolution, but you can see that every type sort of has a little name to it, and then a description of who they are. And this test, I think you can take online for about $45 if you haven't taken it already. And it gives you a really nice feel for who you are as a person and how you compare to others. And again, it's a very popular tool. They use this in companies, and there's books on it everywhere. And people will even use this for various things. So they'll use it as an indicator of career. I think someone gave me as a book titled Do What You Are, which is basically for every combination of letters, there are various recommendations for what types of jobs you might like. And actually, you can type any 4-letter combination into Google and get many, many things just on the internet about that type. So that's what's really fun about the Myers-Briggs, is that once you know your letters, you can learn a lot about yourself based on those letters, and we can discuss it in depth. So that's what's fun about the Myers-Briggs. So this is another one of those who am I type assessments. Okay, the Enneagram is also a who am I type assessment, and it's a very deep one. And so the Enneagram has 9 types, as you can see in this diagram, and then within each type there's 9 levels. There's also a bunch of triads. So you can see in this diagram there's anger, there's fear, there's image, then there's all these arrows pointing from one type to another, and you can see between the 2 and the 8 there's an arrow going from the 8 to the 2, there's an arrow going from the 2 to the 8, and there down here we have a code that says stress and relax. So it's kind of a complicated assessment, and I guess that is the big thing with the Enneagram, is that it's a very deep assessment, and it's pretty complicated and difficult to learn compared to something like a Myers-Briggs where there's just 4 letters to learn. However, the great thing about the Enneagram is if you want to go deep and find what it is that's getting in your way, or find what your path of spiritual growth is, or personal growth, I can tell you that over the last 2 years, I've noticed a very eerie correlation between the deep tools that we use at Aspyrre and the Enneagram, which has compelled me to study the Enneagram more this year. And I've been spending a lot of time over the last month working with the Enneagram, and we're going to have 2 classes dedicated to the Enneagram this month. In fact, I've changed them, so they're not going to be in the original diagram that Kathy sent you, the original overview of our classes that Kathy sent you, but they are going to be on the 24th and 28th of July. I'm going to do 2 Enneagram classes for you. And I think that you'll get a lot out of them, especially those of you that want to do belief work, because I have found that when we do the immunity to change process, and when we do belief work, and even when people are creating their themes and really working hard on coming up with a good theme, everything seems to correlate to people's Enneagram type, which means if you can find out what your Enneagram type is, you're probably going to get some great information that's going to help you accelerate any belief work or work on getting unstuck that you want to do in this program. Okay, so those are the types of assessments you would use for self-discovery, the ones we just did. The Myers-Briggs and the Enneagram are the 2 big personality ones, and then you have that whole slew of career assessments that, again, we can't even name because there's zillions of them. Now, there's another type of assessment that could be useful, which is telling you your role in a group. The first type of tool is a 360. And these types of tools are either 360 tools or they're observation-based tools. In other words, they don't necessarily get their information based on your inner thoughts and feelings or who you are. They get their information on how you behave or how you show up to others, and that's actually very different from what you're experiencing inside. So these assessments that we're about to go over are going to be more oriented on what you look like from the outside. They're valuable when working in groups or as a leader, because as a leader, no matter how well you know something on the inside, what you don't know is how other people are receiving you, and that's really important information as a leader, to know how other people are receiving you or experiencing you, and also when you're working on a team or trying to get a team to work well together. You can test differently depending on the role you play in different groups. So when you use these types of assessments, you could actually test differently based on the group that you're in, because you might play a slightly different role in a different group. So you might test with your family as someone that's more domineering than you would test in one of your work groups where you might have a more passive role. So again, these types of assessments don't really tell you who you are at all. They just tell you how you show up, which is also very valuable information. One thing about these assessments that I've noticed is that there's a danger of groups stereotyping each other or seeing one style or type as better than another based on their culture or their leader's type. So when we do these types of assessments in teams, we have to be really careful to set it up so that people see value in all the different styles and they don't see one style as better than another. Okay, so the Kiersey. Now the Kiersey is an interesting tool, and I've actually used it and gotten trained on it. It has 4 temperaments, and the funny thing is that it uses the Myers-Briggs letters. And I think there was a big lawsuit, and Myers-Briggs said they couldn't use their 4 letters anymore. But when I was trained on it, they were still using the 4 letters. So I have a very clear map as to how the Myers-Briggs letters map to these 4 temperaments. But Kiersey was very clear when he did this, is that there really are only 4 temperaments, and the Kiersey test that you take is very different from the test you take to get your Myers-Briggs score. So you could take the Myers-Briggs and you could take the Kiersey, and you could get 2 completely, well, maybe not completely different, but you could get 2 different scores. Now, the Kiersey has these 4 different categories: the guardian, the artisan, the rational, and the idealist. And I don't know if you guys can see here, but there's words here, abstract and concrete words, and doing what's right and doing what works. So Kiersey has 4 temperaments. Even though they use the same letters as the Myers-Briggs, they don't get to them the same way. Basically what they do is they look at you externally. Even though you're answering things, you're answering questions within yourself, but they're only looking at how you talk and what drives your behavior. So there's only 2 dimensions here. How you talk: do you talk abstractly using ideas, or do you talk concretely using facts? And that sort of corresponds to the Myers-Briggs N and S. So the people who are S on the Myers-Briggs and like to perceive information as facts usually like to talk about information as facts too. So they might talk about what's going on at the party, or they might talk about what things look like, or what things taste like, or smell like, or hear or sound like, but they're not necessarily going to talk about their ideas so much, whereas people who are more N on the Myers-Briggs spectrum are going to tend to talk a lot more about their ideas about things, like, isn't this a great idea, and what if this happened, and what if we did this and that. And if you listen to how people talk, you can typically tell whether they're S or N, or whether they're guardians and artisans use the concrete words, and idealists and rationals use the more abstract words. They talk about ideas. Then the other thing they talk about is what drives behavior, what's right or what works. So guardians and idealists, they do what they believe is right, and rationals and artisans do what they believe will get them results quickly. And they're a little bit more flexible about whether it's quote-unquote right or wrong. Now, a guardian will see right as more following the external rules, whereas idealist sees right as following their internal rules, which kind of makes sense when you think about the idealist fitting in the ideas category and the guardian fitting in the facts category. So a guardian sees right as following the rules that are sitting outside and very easy for everybody to see. An idealist might follow their internal rules or guidelines, their moral rules, but they may break an external rule. They don't necessarily see the external rules as the measure of right and wrong. They see their internal value system as a measure of right and wrong. Rationals really, really love the search of knowledge, and so they're going to do what works. They're going to try to get results. They're going to try to create they think really logically, and they create these big systems for knowledge in their head, and so they're really good at that. And artisans, they do what works, and they tend to create an impact in the world. So rationals will think logically, and they'll create big systems in their head. They'll conceive of very systematic, complex things, and artisans tend to be the people that make big things happen in the world, such as hit really big sales numbers or do really, really big athletic feats. So they make a huge impact physically in the world, or they're artists or musicians. So that's kind of how the 4 boxes fit. So again, it's a much more simple model than the Myers-Briggs, and so it's a little bit easier to learn because it's 4 types instead of 16 types. It's also way easier than the Enneagram. So people like this, and this is kind of I guess I would call it a hybrid type, because even though it looks at your outside behavior, that doing what's right and doing what works is sort of an internal motivation. And so I feel like it's sort of a combination assessment. So it looks at you sort of from the outside and from the inside. It may be a little shallower than something like the Enneagram, but it gives you an outside and an inside look. Okay, now sometimes the Kiersey doesn't differentiate between people well. So the whole thing about Kiersey is people are different, and we need to stop this trying to make other people like us. But then the way the people get divided up is that guardians are the majority of the population. I think they did something like 40% of the population are guardians, and 35% are artisans, and then maybe, I don't know if I'm doing the math right, but maybe we're down to 20% or 15% idealists and only 5 to 10% rationals. So what happens is you can go into an organization, and I have done this twice now, where we've gone into an organization and 80% of the people that we were testing were in this square, this guardian square, and you'd have 1 or 2 people in these squares. And so it was really, really hard to do a people are different workshop because everyone was in this box, so it kind of seemed like everyone was the same. So I didn't really like using the Kiersey as a tool to show differences in the group, but it really is an easier way to get a sense for what your preferences are and what your style is, and so it's kind of fun to use that way. But speaking of style, we have the DISC, which is a very popular model, also uses 4 categories, and I personally have not been trained on the DISC. Our fellow coach, Linda Denton, who works with Aspyrre a lot, is currently immersing herself in the DISC. So she tends to immerse herself in one assessment at a time. She had immersed herself in immunity to change last year, and then before that she was pretty immersed in the Enneagram. So one of the things I love about Linda is she'll immerse herself in various assessments, and so I can always lean on her when I need more information. But she's really excited about the DISC because she feels like they've taken it to a new level, and so she's using that a lot this year. The DISC has 4 types, D for more dominant, I for influential, S for steady, and C for compliant. The DISC will look at what your natural style is, which is how you prefer to work, and your adaptive style, how you interact with others at work. And so this is mainly a style thing. It doesn't say a lot about your personality. It just talks about how you show up at work. Do you drive? Do you kind of inspire? Do you support? or do you, kind of calculate and analyze things? So that's sort of what the disc does, and then it kind of goes into the differences, and it's pretty easy to understand. You could do a training in a half day and people could get it and get their scores and sort of know. It is very widely used, just like the Myers-Briggs. So I'd say the tools that are most popular that are used in organizations today are the disc and the Myers-Briggs. I personally didn't have a good experience with the disc. I felt like it was really simplistic and surface level for my purposes at the time. But again, I only got a very skimming overview of it when I made that judgment, so I may not have been giving it due diligence. So that's why I have it here and this nice graphic, and you never know where we will go from here with it. The one thing to keep in mind, though, is there is a danger in stereotyping, and for people who are D's or I's or C's or S's to think that that letter is a better letter than the other letters. And what people will do in teams, which is not good, is they will label each other. Oh, you're an I, that's why that's your behavior, or you're a C, that's why that's your behavior. And then they start making judgments about type, and that can be very dangerous. It doesn't really, it kind of minimizes the benefit that you can get from a tool, because these tools are designed not to create conflict, but to resolve conflicts, to help people understand the good in each other. But if they understand how they're different and then they use that more as a basis of judging each other instead of a basis of embracing each other's differences, then we end up having a problem. Now, instead of a disc, I used a social styles tool, which honestly most people will say is almost just like the disc. The D, the drivers fit the D, the expressives are like the I's in the disc, the amiables are like the S's in the disc, and then the analyticals are like the C's in the disc. So it's kind of the same, but I love this one because when I was in corporate America, this is the one we did, and the way you get to how people are is by an external assessment, a 360 type assessment. In other words, you don't score yourself, other people score you. So when you get told you're an amiable not because of anything you say or do, but because of how other people experience you. And that reduces your ability to manipulate the outcome of the test, and it really gives you a clear idea of how you're showing up to the others in the group. And I can tell you that I've shown up differently in different groups. Okay, so it's very much like the disc, but it's done using the 360 questionnaires. It also measures versatility and stress patterns. So this particular assessment, if you score kind of in the middle here, sometimes that means you're more versatile, but sometimes it doesn't. There's another versatility measure that they sometimes do in the 360 questionnaires. And there's also a stress pattern. So for example, if you're all stressed out as an analytical, then you become more driving, and then you become more amiable, and then you become more expressive. So there's actually a Z pattern that you go to starting from any particular place in the table, and that's kind of an interesting little thing too with this assessment that's fun to go into and kind of understand how your style changes under stress. Again, easy to understand, fun to use, and I can almost get people to self-assess on this one. I can have them stand on a line in a group team meeting, and most people will put themselves accurately on this line, which is the people versus task-oriented line. And then you just have to do this line, which is more assertive and less assertive, and people don't necessarily see how assertive they are in other people's eyes, so they need help getting sorted here by their peers. But if you're doing it in the group, you can sort each other, and it's very interesting. And then people will can almost sort themselves. Same danger in stereotyping for this one. I did one of these at a company, and the boss was a driver, and everyone else in the company was an analytical. And I think that we had maybe one expressive. And then the driver just got frustrated, and he said that they all had to be more driving. And he said that after a while, but you could tell they were getting so caught up in the styles that they were using it as their only frame of reference. The good thing about this assessment, though, is that in general, groups break out fairly evenly, or they're supposed to anyway, but I did think it was interesting that, again, in this company, based on the culture, a lot of people fit into one category. So in the company that I did this in, most people fall into the analytical category. So people will fall into certain categories within certain organizations if they are influenced by the culture. Okay, let's take a look at the Aspyrre tools and assessments. We have what I already went over, the In My Element stories, the proudest moments, and we use this to discover your core strengths and values. The needs program, this isn't really an assessment, but it's a tool that we use whenever you're reacting a lot, or you're feeling drained, or you're feeling stressed a lot, sad, any negative feelings. If those feelings seem to be getting in the way of your ability to move forward, then I usually will put you through the needs program. For those of you who are stuck in patterns and you really want to have some breakthrough transformation, we do the deep work, which is belief work and immunity to change. And then the Enneagram I'm going to be pushing because this is, again, one of the deepest personality tools we have, and it will complement your belief work and your immunity to change work, and it will also complement the work that you do in the needs program. Outside assessments, career counselor or online career tests for extra career guidance if the In My Element stories isn't giving you enough of what you need. For your team, if you at work have a team and you want to take a look at how the team does, the Kiersey, DISC, and social styles are all great assessments for teams to do together. For your own leadership growth, what I like to do is a 360 assessment interview style, which means I actually interview everybody that you want to get feedback from, and that way I can get good and useful feedback from people and they're not just answering a questionnaire. The Myers-Briggs for deeper understanding of your unique strengths and style compared to others. Whoops. And yeah, I think the Myers-Briggs is a good one because everyone likes to know what their 4 letters are, and there's so much material out there that correlates to the Myers-Briggs score that even if the Myers-Briggs score might not be as deep as the Enneagram, I think it's good to have both. Okay, I wanted to end with just telling you what classes we have in July. So you're probably listening to this on or about the July 7th. We're going to be doing this overview on the 7th, but obviously I'm not going to be spending as much time as I did on this recording talking about it. On Friday, July 10th, we're going to go into social styles. On the 14th, we're going to talk about the In My Element stories and how you go about discovering your strengths that way. On Friday the 17th, we'll talk about teams and how to use assessments with teams. On the 21st, we'll talk about the needs assessment, and I changed the classes on Friday the 24th and Tuesday the 28th to Enneagram, class 1 and 2. And last Friday of the month, we always do writer's forum. So that's what's coming up. Please remember to send me an email if there's anything specific you have in terms of a question. And I really look forward to hearing you on a class. I thank you for listening and watching this to kind of get you going and get you a feel for the assessments. But this doesn't really replace being on a class because in the class we're going to have some really interesting discussions about the assessments and about how they apply to you individually. All right. Thanks for listening. Bye-bye.